let's talk a little bit about this concept of non-ejaculatory orgasm and some of the practicalities of it, as well as we're going to directly go into some of the dynamics of sex and how to control ejaculation while having more vigorous sex. So, non-ejaculatory orgasm. This goes hand in hand with what we were talking about earlier about preserving our semen, not wasting it. For me, this pathway of achieving non-ejaculatory orgasm was very unclear for several years. Mostly because I was just working with books in the beginning, and it wasn't really clear to me like what it was like. I had this expectation of it's going to be an ejaculation, but no fluid coming out. And so for years I was kind of like, I don't know if this is working, if I'm doing things right. I had a lot of expectation. What started to happen for me was I just noticed that when I was doing these practices during sex, when I was just circulating my energy, focusing on, breathing and just being in the moment with it, because I wasn't trying to ejaculate anymore, that was kind of out of the picture the vast majority of the time. I just noticed that, you know what, even if I'm not ejaculating, even if I'm not having an orgasm, I'm really enjoying sex. It feels really good. I'm experiencing massive amounts of pleasure, and I'm like putting it into parts of my body. It's incredible. So it's like, for me, sex became like a yogic practice, charging myself up with sexual energy. So I'm like, that's fantastic. And I started to just kind of not care about whether or not I was having an orgasm. I was having non-ejaculatory orgasm experiences, but once I started releasing any expectation around it, that's when I noticed that because I wasn't trying to get anywhere, it was opening me up much more to some of these deep, intensely pleasurable experiences. And then one day I realized that it feels like when you're approaching ejaculation, you're on that threshold of immense pleasure and build up and arousal. When you go from there and then you go over to the edge of ejaculating, it actually doesn't feel that much better, satisfying. It's like
sharpness, but
it's a sharpness, and there's a spasming happen, but it's actually not that much more pleasure than when you're already at this heightened, incredible state of arousal. And then there's that drop off and you can't keep going. It's like, damn, I would like to do that again, but I gotta wait, an hour, a couple days, whatever. So basically, there's a bit of a transition. As you're learning these practices, you may not have mind-blowing non-ejaculatory orgasms right away. So don't have that expectation. But when I released this fixation to orgasm in general, paradoxically, that's when I started having incredible experiences of orgasm. Some of you have heard me, maybe all of you have heard me say this before, but I like to redefine orgasm simply as a heightened sensation of pleasure that's outside your normal experience. And that really liberates you because, even with this definition, how many of you have had an orgasm under that, a non-ejaculatory orgasm under that definition?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, fantastic. Even if it's super subtle, it's like, that felt good, I didn't ejaculate, it was a little heightened. Then we can really build on that. The whole thing is, we need a different pathway. The ejaculatory orgasm is based on this stress response through the sympathetic circuit of your nervous system, the fight or flight response. And that's dominant in men because that's what they've used for years and years and years. When I was first experiencing masturbation, there was a little bit of fear that my mom might walk in on me. And when I was on the family computer hooked up to dial-up internet, I might get caught. So there's this underlying fear. So the body's kind of in survival mode. And you do that over and over and over again, and the body associates sex and arousal as being a little bit unsafe, like something might happen, so I need to be on edge, and maybe I should get this done with quickly. So that gets stuck in the body. So we need to retrain ourselves out of that. And the other pathway, the one we want to emphasize in sexual kung fu, is the parasympathetic nervous system, essentially having a relaxation response in the body. Because again, the ejaculatory orgasm, there's a few things that have to happen to get into it. Number one, you have to switch to be more dominant into sympathetic nervous system. Squeezing the pelvic floor muscles, gripping. I noticed that that's almost exclusively how I masturbated, was I was gripping my pelvic floor because it increases the sharpness of sensation and drives you towards that ejaculatory orgasm. It feels great, it feels fantastic, but it's unsustainable. The other thing is the breath tends to become very constricted and shallow. Tension in general, you start to tense up as you're kind of pushing yourself into an ejaculatory orgasm. And initially that was something you chose to do probably. You realized, oh, if I do this, if I tense up and squeeze up, it's actually gonna drive me towards this ejaculation. That feels fantastic. And just like anything, you do it so many times, you're not even aware of it anymore and you're not really in control of it anymore. The subconscious mind takes over. It's like When you're first learning to drive, I remember for me, I was like, oh shit, like, am I gonna drop the road? Am I in the right lane? And now we drive around looking at our phone and eating a sandwich. Oh, maybe you're self-cultivating too. I don't know what you're doing in driving, who knows? But we're able to drive. It may not be optimal, but we're getting it done. Same thing with sex. So we gotta change our sexual form. The relaxation response. Deep breathing. Most simple foundation of both intensifying and sustaining sexual pleasure, intensifying in a way that it makes you feel it in your whole body. You deepen your breath and you deepen your container to feel and experience arousal. Breathing from the belly. Feeling the pelvic floor expand as you inhale. Anytime I'm feeling a bit like I'm tensing up during sex, the first thing I go to is a deep breath. And a vast majority of time, that's all I need. It's like, oh shit, I just wasn't breathing deeply. So that deep breathing, it creates this expansion, stretching of the tissues, the diaphragm, the pelvic floor. So it loosens things up, it loosens up the nerves. So that's your foundation. And of course, being aware of keeping the pelvic floor relaxed. There's the initial, like I said yesterday, there's the initial very obvious, like, yeah, I'm clenching my pelvic floor. But then it gets a lot more subtle. It's like, you may not think it's contracting, but if you're on a buildup towards ejaculation, there has to be some level of contraction there for that to occur. So then it gets into more nuanced levels of releasing that. We're gonna do an exercise that for me was a game changer in releasing this pattern. So pelvic floor relaxation, which builds upon that foundation of breathing. And then the next layer is the energy circulation. Because like I said, it's like your genitals become a pressure cooker, all this pressure and excitement building up usually is released out the penis. Well, now we're using orgasmic breathing to let that steam valve open and that pressure gets redirected to the whole body and you start to feel it, this nice, subtle sensation of pleasure in your entire body, which eventually can build up to powerful states of orgasm. And then when you're doing a power lock, it's like you're just blasting open the steam valve and it releases a lot of the pressure into the rest of the body. So that's the mechanics, the general mechanics of managing arousal, ejaculation control at its most simple level as far as what you can do technically. Now there's also mental aspects of sexual performance. A big pattern for me that I started to realize was, and I, working with many, many men on this, it's a common pattern, which is performance anxiety. Having this need to like, well, I need to make sure my partner's enjoying it. That's the most important thing. And obviously it is important. Yeah, you should want to make sure your partner's taken care of, but this is often rooted in people-pleasing patterns where another person's validation of us is so important that without it, we feel like there's something wrong with me. It's a deep subject in itself we could spend a whole workshop on, but basically one of the most helpful things for me overcoming this pattern was how do I get out of my head into this like worried, what are they thinking? Am I doing the right thing? And kind of, it's almost like for me reframing it as how do I enjoy myself? And that can sound very selfish. And it could become selfish, but if you're the type of person that's like, tends to be overly worried about what your partner's thinking, or I don't know, or if you're constantly asking them questions like, was that okay? Was this okay? Should I do this? Should I do that? It kind of kills the mood. Like women want to be led. They don't want to be asked a million questions. Something that really helps me is I think of like, how can I most enjoy myself? Like tapping into the eroticism of sex and it's like, how can I just enjoy being with my partner? How can I enjoy their body, enjoy my body? And just like, what do I want out of the sex? And just like, obviously with consent, there could be some communication, at least at some point about, boundaries and things like that. So like finding a playfulness with it, getting out of the seriousness of like, oh, fuck, I have to perform, and just like allowing yourself to be spontaneous, to be comfortable and confident within yourself. And I think something that really helps with this is having a self-pleasure practice where, sometimes men get hung up about this, like, oh, masturbation's dirty and wrong. I'm not saying that, you should be jerking off for hours a day, but it's just, I think that overcoming shame around yourself and your body. When I was a teenager, some of my first sexual experiences, I used to be really embarrassed about like just my body, and especially like if my dick was flaccid, I wouldn't want to be seen. It's like I'd cover it up. It's like I can only be seen with a hard penis, So So overcoming a lot of these layers of shame and around the body. So really owning your own pleasure in a self-pleasure practice, and like learning to make sound, to move your body, even like looking at yourself in the mirror and like loving yourself, making love to yourself. For me, that was a dramatically healing practice. And I noticed the more that I integrated that into my life, the more I felt just like confident in myself and just, enjoyed being myself in the bedroom as well. And of course, these practices help your mind have something to anchor into. Because when you're getting into worry mode, the breath becomes shallow, the body tenses, especially my face. I notice is where I hold a lot of my mental tension, like I've mentioned. So I'm always checking in with that. Relax. You can spend some time looking yourself in the mirror, and like notice, like allow yourself to think of something that worries you. You can put yourself in that mode of performance anxiety, and then notice like, what are you doing when you look at yourself in the mirror? That could be something very helpful as well. But yeah, the breathing, the circulation, the relaxation, all of that helps you to be present, to be in your body, and be more spontaneous during sex. So talking about the non-ejaculatory orgasm, on a practical level, coming back to this point of imagine you've never had an orgasm, you're not attached to it, and then just allow yourself to explore, whether it's self-pleasure or sex, how deeply can I relax into it? As you feel the pleasure, notice your tendency to want to drive it somewhere else. Like I need to take this and push it further, which usually involves tensing up or like fantasizing, thinking about something sexual, which isn't necessarily always wrong, but to stay in the zone of sustainable sexual, like once you become aroused, if you use too much visual imagery, if you're by yourself, like definitely I don't recommend porn, but even fantasy, the thought of sexual imagery and body parts often tends to push you in that realm towards ejaculation. It's a subtle thing. I remember doing this experiment where I was like, okay, I'm thinking about body parts and like seeing this in my mind, and I felt just that subtle engagement of the pelvic floor and a slight feeling of building up towards ejaculation, which intensified the more that I focused on it. And then I was like, what if I don't think about anything? What if I just smile from my heart? I just breathe and just relax into what I'm feeling, 100% in feeling mode. And I realized it put me into the state of a lot of sexual pleasure that felt like it was really connecting to my whole body. And there was no buildup. It was like I couldn't ejaculate in that state. So getting a lot more into this like feelingness instead of like thinking about what arouses you. And obviously there's a balance between both because sometimes you need to build more arousal. And so seeing how much you can relax and release into pleasure. And think of, often talking about like circulating the energy through the body. Like, okay, I need to move this out of here and up here. And this is another thing I've kind of realized recently is instead of thinking of I need to move this out of my penis and up here, it's more of a feeling of I need to spread this. So like it's feeling good here, and that's fine, I can maintain that, but can I spread that feeling? Can I extend it into my balls? Like if you breathe your pleasure from your penis into your balls, like how we breathe in orgasmic breathing, interesting thing to try. Breathe the pleasure into your balls, and then from there breathe that up your spine. And then can I feel that pleasure extend into my lower back? Can I feel it extend into my spine? We were talking a bit about this over lunch yesterday, think of your spine as an extension of your cock. And you were talking about there's these actual physical connections between the dick and the spine. But just imagine your spine is part of your penis. Imagine your spine is a penis, and you're more aware of what's happening in your spine, and you start to feel like, what if it was this erogenous organ? And that pleasure starts to spread, especially as you're moving, really getting like if you're self-pleasuring, move your hips, move your spine. We often just say you're like this and get all stiff, and not stiff in the good way. So allow it to move, create movement. The movement of the pelvis really helps pumping the energy up the spine. And get out of, I need to get somewhere or I need to have an orgasm, and just enjoy. You make it a meditation of like how deeply can I feel what's happening and how can I get my whole body involved in it. And another thing is that the more hard you are, for me at least, the less sensitive overall you are to have like a strong contraction in the pelvic floor. What I found was that when my penis gets kind of soft, if it's like half flaccid, or even when it's fully flaccid, it's a lot more sensitive to that contracting in the pelvic floor. Something to pay attention to. There's a guy I learned a lot from. His name is Dr. Newman K. Lin. Anyone ever stumble upon his stuff? He had this very obscure, he had like a website throughout the 2000s. I mean, it existed until a couple years ago when he died. He had a lot of incredible information on sexual practices, but his website was an absolute mess. It was like, 2000s website, ugly. There was a million links on every page that went to another page with a million links on. It was a headache. He didn't speak very good English, but I managed to piece a lot together because he was sharing some amazing stuff. He planted a seed of pelvic floor relaxation for me, and we're gonna do one of his techniques today. And this was something he talked about, is like the more you can power up your erection, actually the more you'll be able to sustain sexual pleasure. And an important nuance here is there's a certain part of the penis. So if this is a penis, right here, the frenulum area, the nerves here specifically are the most likely to generate that contraction response. So if you can, as you're developing this, and just in general, this is good for stimulating more arousal and erection, but it's not good if you want to maintain control. So like obviously if you're self-pleasuring, you can completely control, instead of this standard grip where your index finger's hitting the frenulum, you can what I call the pistol grip, where you just lift the first finger and now there's nothing on the frenulum and it's a different type of stimulation. And what this looks like during sex is different sexual positions you can adjust so that this frenulum's not being stimulated so much. A position like doggy style, front to back position, is going to put a lot more pressure on there. So, I said it was my Achilles heel for a little while, that I made it my strength. Or like if you're on top of your partner, the angle of your hips are going to change the angle. So what you want to do is, this was a vagina, okay? You want to basically have the top part of your penis putting as much friction on the top wall of the vagina as possible and less on your frenulum. And so if you're at a bit of a higher attack angle, so to speak, which is why my favorite position is you're standing like this, partner's on the edge of the bed, propping up her hips a little bit so that you get this angle. The power locks, again, like I said, practicing the power locks, doing it in an aroused state, sex or not during sex, just notice like what happens when you really breathe intensively, hold the breath, guide the energy, and then what do you feel from that? I feel a massive shift, and I feel this like wave of pleasure in my body, and I'll call that an orgasm. Sometimes it's a full-blown, like just the other day I was doing this, and I actually wasn't even fully power locking. I was breathing how we do 9 breaths, and then I did a breath, what we've been doing, where I deeply relax the anus, and just this gentle suction up. And I just held the breath, and I had, basically it felt pretty similar to an ejaculatory orgasm, just as levels of intensity, but there was nothing happening down here. It was just like, holy shit. So the power locks can just give you these spontaneous blasts of full body state of orgasm. You experiment. What happens when I circulate my energy? What happens when I relax deeper and deeper into the pleasure? How much can you relax your belly and your pelvic floor? If it's a self-stimulation session, just close your eyes and just merge with your dick, your pelvic floor, and your belly, and like how deeply can I release into that pleasure? And I've had some incredible orgasmic experiences doing that. And this kind of concept of, again, the valley orgasm, as it's commonly called, this non-ejaculatory orgasm, it's not, because there's the peak orgasm, which is the ejaculatory orgasm, which is this very obvious onset. Like it's sharp, and like all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's begun and it's happening, and boom, now it's over. That's a peak orgasm. It's like a mountain. It's a sharp up, a peak, and then it drops off. That's not what these types of orgasms are like. Sometimes they can be more like that. Like again, this power lock orgasm I had, it was almost a peak-like, and that was very intense, but it wasn't depleting in that the ejaculations are released and then you're done. It wasn't that type of experience. But it's more so, it's a state that you enter into. Like what it feels like for me, like the most commonly, it's just like all of a sudden, maybe I did a power lock and like I'm just in the state now, or I'm orgasmic breathing and I'm just in it. All of a sudden, I feel a bit heightened. It's like, ooh, this feels really good. This feels fantastic. Like, ooh, this feels good in my spine. And I can maintain that for several minutes. And like, if it feels really good, it's really satisfying, and it's like intense, well, I'll call that an orgasm. That's the valley orgasm. It's just a state that I'm in and I can sustain it. It's not so sharp, like, oh, fuck, baby, you know what I mean? It's just like, ooh, this feels nice. And I've had levels of that where it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, a little more slow over time. It's like an ocean wave, like, oh, it's really deep, deep pleasure. Then, okay, it kind of mellowed off, then, whoa, even deeper. So it's this waviness. Instead of a sharp and then a drop off, it's much more wavy. So like I said, it's a state that you enter into, and it's not something you can really force yourself into. And I'll share, one of my more intense non-ejaculatory orgasm experiences. Let's see, there's many, but one of the first ones that was like, holy shit, I was having sex with, this woman, we've been having sex for a few minutes. You know, it was nice, it was great. And I looked into her eyes, you know, our eyes locked, and I'm doing the orgasmic breathing, I'm moving the energy, but all of a sudden, like, there's this buildup feeling in my belly. It's like, ooh. And then it starts to feel like that feeling in your penis when you're going towards an ejaculation is just that, ooh, it's a nice feeling. It was that, except in my belly. And then it extended up into my heart. It was like, whew, and this deep emotional, this deep vulnerability, really intense feeling. And then it moved up into my head, and it was like, it started to feel like my head was a penis. And there was like this spasming, not necessarily physical, but just this energetic pulsation up my spine. It was like something started to shoot, just this like I was ejaculating out my crown. It felt incredible. And I was just in this intense state. It was intense pleasure, really incredible pleasure. And then it felt like my consciousness was like just leaving the room. Like I was expanding beyond the room, expanding beyond the planet. And it was like I was feeling the polarity between stars and galaxies. You know, it sounds weird, but like this is what I was experiencing. It was just like I was having this like universal cosmic orgasm. It was crazy. That's why you don't need psychedelics. And it went on for several minutes. And it was a woman I was dating at the time. She wasn't even practicing this stuff, but she was having it like the same experience with me. And as you know, it ended, she's like, "What the fuck happened?" You know, it was crazy. It was intense. So that happens because you know women are very sensitive, intuitive, and it's like they often don't need to do the practices. It's like if you're doing this, yeah, she's going right with you, and you know they tend to be naturally multi-orgasmic. So yeah, the non-ejaculatory orgasm is real. And maybe the question is like, well, how do you end sex if you're not ejaculating? Like how does it ever end? And yeah, naturally. And it's often still like I could keep going, but like, yeah, I feel satisfied. Versus ejaculation, where it's like, I'm done. You know, I'm throwing in the towel. I couldn't continue if I wanted to. It's kind of like, you know, you don't want to eat until you're so just stuffed with food you couldn't possibly. It's like it's the same thing. It's like you should still have a little bit of desire at the end of it. You know, that's like it's the potential for more is what that is. If you're just dumping everything out every time, you know, it's depleting you. I also find power locks to be a really nice alternative to ejaculation because again, it allows you to reach this state of completion to where you're spreading that buildup throughout the body, and it's just like, okay, all right, the pressure's out. I've harnessed it, I've captured it, fantastic. My wife and I often end with just passive circulation. So I'll inhale. We coordinate this where I inhale as she exhales down her front channel and up my back channel as I inhale. And then I exhale down my front as she's inhaling and up the back of her body. So basically just this rotational exchange. You can do it in any position. It's really nice to do it in like yob yum position where she's sitting on top of you, you're both upright, just having those like straight spines. I feel it the most powerful, but we'll do it in any position. And she can do power locks with you. Like, you know, my wife does them with me a lot, all the time. You can even do this thing where you're sitting in yob yum and you exhale and lean forward, and she inhales leaning back, and then she exhales leaning forward, you inhale. So you're like coordinating together, and then you hold the breath, do your power lock together. Very powerful. It's kung fu. I mean, it's a sexual kung fu, and it takes training, it takes experience. So you pick, okay, today, or if you're in a session of self-pleasure, whatever, you can say, for 5 minutes, I'm going to focus on deep breathing. For 5 minutes, I'm going to focus on really keeping my pelvic floor relaxed. 5 minutes, I'm going to focus on drawing the energy. So you can kind of like, you know, isolate, and then eventually it can all start to happen together.